Questions and doubts are a common and necessary part of every journey. They help find the best answers to life's hard questions and to challenge long-held beliefs that might not actually be true or proven or healthy. They can keep us from harm or help us to escape bad situations. Sometimes our questions and doubts can set us free, but they aren't easy, and these trying times can make us feel even more disconnected, desperate, and alone. But you are not alone. Recovering from Religion is an organization comprised of people just like you, people who have asked questions, who understand doubt, who can help you navigate through the confusion, and who are genuinely there to help. 24 hours a day, any day, you can reach out for encouragement and support on the telephone or via online chat. And RfR even provides online communities to connect with others just like you, even if you choose to do so anonymously. Recovering from Religion is a safe place where you can reach out, explore your questions, converse with a friend, and be completely yourself without fear. No judgment, no rejection, just an opportunity to connect with someone who understands. There's no reason to go it alone. Recovering from Religion is ready whenever you are. Reach out today at recoveringfromreligion.org.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another RfRx Talk. I am Eric Wells, the Support Group Director for Recovering from Religion. And with me is my best pal, the most awesome person in the world, Mr. Todd Yoder, and he is the Helpline Director for Recovering from Religion. Todd, we were yammering a little bit before, but how are you doing?
I'm doing well. We are under a tornado watch here in Arkansas. It's supposed to hit here within the next 30 minutes. So if suddenly I go blank or you see me scrambling to go for cover, you know what's going on.
Got it.
If I may lose power or, internet service or something. So, but yeah, so we're under the watch for the next 3 hours. So.
Got it. Well, I will be sad if you disappear. But
me too.
We're going to start like we do with every single one with a poll. So I'm going to launch a poll here, and it's going to have to do with the today's discussion. I'll let it go up there for a few minutes, and if you wouldn't mind casting your opinion on there, it'd be really helpful. So Todd, you want to start us off?
Yeah. So while you guys are taking the poll, we want to kind of review again of what is RfR all about. These talks that we're having, we are just trying to get some topics that we think are relevant to what's going on in people's lives and want to give everyone some tools to help cope with things in their lives. And tonight we're talking about grief, and this is going to be such a good topic. We're all experiencing grief or are going through grief, and maybe we don't know quite how to handle it. Well, tonight maybe we can look at grief and figure out some tools on how to better handle when we're struggling. Our talks aren't in replacement of our community, but we want it to support and to be like a bonus.
Yes, so Recovering from Religion is dedicated to helping folks who have doubts or have experienced some religious trauma and pain to overcome those things. And we do those in several different ways, from hope and healing and support. Todd, why don't you tell us about the Helpline community and what that does for us?
Sure. I'd love to. Our hope, we offer hope, healing, and support. Our hope comes from hearing other people's stories, how they worked their way through and navigated through their journey of coming out of their religious belief, the struggles that they had, the questions that they had, and made it to the other side. When another person hears these stories that are in the middle of that journey, it can give them hope that, hey, we can make it too. And the healing comes from what we do with our helpline. We have a 24-hour, 7 days a week chat and calls lines that come in where people can reach out to us from all over the world and talk to a trained agent. and meet with someone who is going to listen to their stories with a compassionate ear, meet them wherever they are in their journey with no judgment or criticism, and offer resources to help that person to make decisions for themselves on how to best deal with these things that they're struggling with.
Yeah.
And would you like to tell us about the support?
I would. So RFR supports individuals in 2 different ways. And the first is through peer support with in-person meetings from the support group program. And that's what I oversee. We have 42 support groups across the world. We also have people that share their stories, and they also share resources as well. And now, due to the outbreak, we are hosting those support group meetings virtually, but once the outbreak is past, we'll be going back to the in-person meetings. There's something special about meeting people face to face and sharing stories and having a compassionate ear listen in that really makes a big impact.
Mm-hmm.
The second way that we support individuals is by connecting them with licensed secular mental health, boy.
Come on, spit it out. You got it.
I got this. The second way we support these individuals is by connecting them with a licensed secular mental health care provider who has been carefully screened by dedicated secular mental health clinicians based on 3 separate criteria. And this is through the Secular Therapy Project, or STP. So the criteria are: they have appropriate licensing in their state or country, they maintain a secular practice so that there is no chance of proselytizing. I know that therapists that I went to once started to proselytize to me, saying I needed to pray more, I needed to read my Bible, check out this verse, and that didn't sit well with me at all. And the third criteria is that they practice the extensive use of evidence-based treatments.
Yeah, and we are meeting one of those therapists tonight. Kayce Hodos, and we are looking forward to have this conversation with her.
Yeah, there's one other place where healing often occurs that we don't necessarily talk about all the time, but it's through the volunteer program that we have. All of us here, all of the folks in the Recovering from Religion system, all of the helpline agents, all the chatline agents, all of the support group leaders, from myself and Todd and the executive director, they are all volunteering. And so I really think that for volunteering, for me, I have gotten so much more out of volunteering for Recovering from Religion than I have ever, put into it. A ton of stuff out of it. Our volunteers are finding so much meaning and purpose by actually helping others, not to mention helping the community that they're in and that we're also building. If you'd like to be part of this, head to Recovering from Religion website and click on the volunteer tab. So Todd, let's talk a little bit about last week's RfRx. Last week was kind of a tough one for both of us. We talked about death without a God. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, I'm really curious of what you got out of it, because I know that was something that you really struggled. I think what I got out of it most is going to tie in with tonight's talk. One of the things that hit with me the hardest was when Dave was talking about, he was diagnosed and stuff, and he knows he's dying. But what really got a hold of him, he started tearing up, was when he talked about the connections that he was making with people, where people would just come in and sit with him and be there with him, and that community, that connection that as we as humans need, really rang a bell for me. And that's something that's hard for us to do sometimes, is to sit in that silence and just to be there with no words. And I want to be a better friend to my friends, to be available to be there for them when they need some help like that. What about you?
Yeah, no, it was exactly the same for me too. That moment where he made it clear, and it struck me so hard that what he's really going to miss are the people. What he's really going to miss are the relationships. And I'll be honest, I'm an introvert. I think I've said this before, and I think that I'm going to do just fine without people. But when I'm really serious about it, when I am really honest with myself about it, I will miss the people. I can't really say that because I'm not going to miss anything, but it's just
The idea of missing the people.
the idea of missing the people,
Yeah.
leaving my wife, and when my mother passes away, and last week I spoke with my wife and I and my mom. We all talked about our grandmothers and how much they impacted us and how much we missed them. My grandmother only knew, or my wife only knew my grandmother for maybe 5 or 6 months before she passed away. And my grandmother made a huge impact on my wife. And we miss her so often. But, and again, this is really going to tie into what we talk about today about grief.
Mm-hmm. How do we handle that?
Yeah.
When we lose someone that's so precious and so meaningful in our lives, and we long to have that connection still. What do we do with that?
Yeah. Well, would you like to do the honor of introducing our guest for this evening?
Yes, I do. I would. So Kayce is a licensed therapist from Wake Forest, North Carolina. Throughout her career, she has worked in a varieties of settings, including hospice, employee assistance programs, and for the last 12 years, private practice. Her current passion is supporting women through their adjustment to motherhood. She has advanced training in loss and grief and postpartum depression and anxiety. She is a proud member of the Secular Therapy Project and the Freedom from Religion Foundation. She is thrilled to be part of the RfRx online mental health programming. Kayce, we want to welcome you.
Thank you, Todd. Thanks, Eric.
Hi, Kayce. So what I'll do is I'm going to kind of post all of your website and how people can find out about you in the chat here. And also during their conversation chat, you are going to probably have some questions. So go ahead and type those questions into the chat. We'll get those answered after we have our discussion. So don't hesitate to participate and pop it on in. Kayce, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Good. You ready?
Weather's nice here in North Carolina. It's springtime and sun is shining. And
I hear there's a storm heading your way, though. If it's hitting Arkansas, it's probably going to head your way pretty soon.
Yeah, I think it's going to be dreary here tomorrow. So we
You're
take
welcome.
what we can get.
You're welcome. So I would like to start off with maybe you telling us what is grief. Do you have a good definition of what grief is?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. I thought we'd go over some basic, terminology. And, the process of loss happens anytime we are forced to give up something significant. So if you think about that, think about how much we're all grieving right now, how much we've given up, how much we're seeing other people giving up. And then, so that's loss. And then grief is the process of transitioning something or somebody that we're attached to from being in the present with us to being present only in our memory. So that's the grieving process. That's what the pain is about. Going from knowing that you're seeing this person, they're with you in the present tense, to only being in the past,
in the memory,
in your memory. Yeah. And that's what the pain is all about, trying to reconcile that, trying to make sense of that, making sense of something that doesn't make sense.
Can this extend to more than just people? I mean, I'll be honest, one of the key things the final things that sort of where I became an atheist was the loss of a very beloved pet about 10 years ago or so. And she went through a horrible bout of bone cancer, and we had to decide to put her down. And about 3 months later, I started just kind of grieving or at least I felt like I was grieving and weeping and stuff like that. Is it more than just people?
Oh, for sure. And pets are one of the most painful, I think. They're part of your family. You know, you attach to them, you choose them, they choose you. You know, when it comes to family, like we all probably have those family members that we wouldn't choose if if the circumstances were different. But your pet is there for you. It's unconditional love for you. It's your companion. They're very special to us. And so when they're not around, and the process of having to put your pet down is heart-wrenching. I don't know how many people have had to do that. I know I have. And there's nothing like that pain. And and the house, I mean, when you get back home from that appointment, your house has never been so still and lonely and quiet, right?
Right. And you get, like you said, that attachment to that pet. I have a dog that I take backpacking with me, and she has her own backpack, and I just love going out in the woods and going on a day or two backpack trip with her. And I know that I'm going to miss Momo, is her name, when she's gone. So yeah.
Yeah, they're always happy to see you.
Yeah.
You don't
Every
fight.
time.
You might get irritated with them, but like they're always there for you. They're happy to see you every time you walk in the door. So pet loss is loss. So that's, and that's one of those things that, and we'll talk a little bit about how to support others, but, people who don't have pets don't always understand how significant they are to us. And that grief happens when we lose a pet, just like when we lose a person or any of the other types of grief that we're going to talk about. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Good. Is there a difference between grieving and mourning?
Yes, Todd. Mourning is the term that we use for the public expression of grief and the public acknowledgement of grief. So it's where the rituals come in, and funeral services or memorials. It's that opportunity that people have for loved ones to come and express their sympathy and publicly recognize you and see you for what you're going through, and to see you going through your loss.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mourning isn't necessarily something you can do in private?
Yeah. I mean, but I think sometimes people use those words. They probably use the word mourning interchangeably with grieving or bereavement. Okay. But mourning is technically is that public acknowledgement of it.
So grief is more the feeling, and mourning is kind of the outward expression of that feeling.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, the grief is what happens internally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So, why are we having this discussion? Like, if we were all kind of raised just fine, and we didn't have any issues with grief, like why are we even having to have this conversation? Because I know that from what I've seen in a lot of the support group meetings, that folks are having a hard time, especially coming out of religious backgrounds, having a very hard time understanding what grief is, and even kind of being okay with it, and even knowing how to deal with it.
Yeah, I think grief is something that we need to be talking about. It's the only way to get healthier at it, is to have the tough conversations. We're not really good at facing pain. As humans, we try our best to stay away from that stuff. And that's our brain, keeping us safe, keeping us going on. If we stopped and really contemplated our own death or the death of people that we care about, we wouldn't even get out of bed. So, our brain really doesn't, I mean, if you could even try that as an experiment, try to think about your own death, and you won't make it for very long, because your brain will just distract you with something else. But, in our society, we're terrible at it. We're terrible at supporting people who are grieving. We're terrible at, because we like to fix things. We like to, naturally, we like to sort things and label things and organize it in neat little boxes and bows, and grief doesn't make sense. And so it really comes down to saying, I don't know what to do with this. It feels uncomfortable, and being in that pain is tough, and we need support through it. And so I think conversations like this one are really important, just to get people talking about it, and realizing that it is messy and it's painful, and it's supposed to be, but you don't have to go through it alone.
Well, I'm really excited to see what type of help you're going to be offering us tonight, what we can use, what tools. Are there some misconceptions about grief that people have?
Definitely. There's a lot of mystery, surrounding grief and death, in general. I think that's one of the scams of religion, is that they've exploited our fear of the unknown and our fear of death. And they've offered us this bargain, if you can follow all of our confusing rules and give us all your money, you can have eternal life. And hey, that's enough for most people to get on board, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But the truth is that we're all capable of grieving without God. And I would say that the healthiest grieving happens without any magical thinking at all.
Seems like, religions in some sense, or at least the religions we know of, are only, very like 3,000 years old, 4,000 years old. That's kind of stretching it. But us humans, we've been on this planet for 200,000 years or so. And it wasn't like we just started grieving 4,000 years ago or something. We had to have evolved the capacity to grieve, and we can even see it in some of our closest animal relatives. We can see it in other animals, in the animal, like elephants, a classic example. Mm-hmm. Even some cetaceans and do it as well. We're not the only ones on this planet. We're not the only species on this planet that grieve, right?
Right, exactly. So and there's further proof that we can do this without any religious beliefs or supernatural, woo-woo. So, and I'll go back to what we were talking about before, about how grief is not just what happens when we lose someone that we love. So I think the first myth I want to dispel is that grief only happens after the death of someone. That's not the only time we grieve. We're grieving really all the time. And especially right now, with the COVID-19 crisis, everybody everywhere is grieving. And I can't think of another time when the whole world was grieving, through the same types of experience. So we are truly all in this together. People are dying, people are losing their jobs. We've lost all of our sense of normalcy. Mm-hmm. And if you just think about how you've been coping with this crisis, you've probably resorted to your, the coping skills that you've been using to deal with any kind of stress in your life. So grief is a very exaggerated, intense type of stress.
So you're suggesting, and I can totally see this, you're suggesting that we are grieving from how the world used to be, like how the loss of our old like schedules and our old ways of being, and that we're experiencing that as a loss.
Absolutely. Kids, I think about kids grieving the end of their school year. This just happened, and we weren't prepared, and they've lost all of the ideas and what they imagined the rest of their school year to look like, vacations, you name it.
Seniors without graduating parties and proms and all that.
Yeah, all of those rituals, those mile markers, they haven't happened the way that we intended them to happen. So we had to give that up. We had to give up those dreams and those ideas of what was to come and reconcile that. And so that, that's the process. You also grieve when you leave your religion.
Absolutely, yes.
So yeah, I mean, think about that. It's very complicated. For many people, it's their foundation. They grew up, as part of a religious tradition, and celebrated and grieved by going to funerals at their church. And some people even went. I mean, their education was affiliated with their church. So when you leave your religion behind, you definitely grieve over that. And that can be a really long process. Grief takes time. And that's another thing humans aren't good with, being patient. We like for things to be fixed up, and leaving your religion is a positive step. But we can grieve over positive things too. And can I throw in one of my favorite quotes by Christopher Hitchens? Christopher Hitchens, in his book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. If you haven't read that, go read it. It's just filled with, I don't know. He's one of my favorite authors. He says, there are days when I miss my old convictions as if they were an amputated limb. But in general, I feel better and no less radical. And you will feel better too, I guarantee, once you leave hold of the doctrinaire and allow your chainless mind to do its own thinking. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even though you're grieving, it is, it's what gets you to the next step.
Which is what?
Which is the next step.
Next step. Okay.
Whatever it is, right? You move forward, not knowing. We don't know. We don't know. We have to be okay with not knowing.
What are some of the other things we can experience grief over?
Well, I definitely wanted to mention Mother's Day. That is coming up for us in this country, in the U.S. And it is a very complicated one. It's okay to feel sad about Mother's Day. It's also okay to be happy about Mother's Day. And if you have a great relationship with your mom and she's around and you celebrate with her, that's awesome. However, there are a lot of people who experience a lot of pain when Mother's Day approaches, either because they've lost their mother, or they don't have a healthy relationship with their mother. There are a lot of toxic moms out there. Hard to believe, I know.
No, I think that's a great point. I see that so often on social media, folks pointing out, I didn't have the greatest mom. I kind of feel a little alone on Mother's Day. And for me personally, my father is not a very nice guy, and I kind of feel the same way on Father's Day. I've gotten past it, but I still is like that old fantasy of having the perfect family, the father who actually cares about you and not about himself. It hits me in the back of the mind a little bit. Yeah,
when you stand there, at the greeting card aisle and you are looking through the cards, there's just not one, for toxic fathers and mothers. So it can leave you feeling isolated if you feel like you just don't fit in with that idea. And women who aren't able to have children, or who have lost children.
Or in abusive relationships, like abusive parents.
Yeah. So, so that's something to keep in mind, as we move on through this week and as that Mother's Day approaches next weekend.
What are some other things that you can think of that we can grieve from?
I think another one that's really important to point out is, there is a term called anticipatory grief. So that is what happens when you have a loved one who has been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and you are going through the process of losing them, especially something like Alzheimer's. where they are slipping away from you. So you start the grief process when you find out that that your loved one is not going to be around as much or as long as you had anticipated. And with Alzheimer's, they start to become someone else. So you lose them that way. It's just a different kind of grief. And when that person actually dies, you still grieve, so it's like you do it twice as the anticipation of it looms over you. And then actually when they die. So as people live longer and longer now, more of us are going to be in those types of situations.
I have kind of a weird experience with that. My mother died of cancer, and she was suffering for nearly 2 years, so we knew it was coming. And then in the summer, she went 23 days without eating, and we all knew that she was going to pass away. And the family got together. We were there around her bed and stuff, and we were grieving for the loss because we knew it was any day. And she just kept hanging on. And then on the 23rd day, she kind of came to and said, "I'm hungry." And she ate and she rebounded. And this was in like September. And so she rebounded. She was in northern Indiana. We ended up bringing her back here to Arkansas. And she had another like 3 months. And then she passed in November. And when she actually passed, I felt like I didn't really grieve for her passing because I had grieved in the summertime that she had passed. I think I came to terms with it or something. I don't know. I just thought that was a weird thing for me to experience.
Yeah, you were at a different place. You still grieved, but it was, maybe not what you imagined. And that's okay. And that's a part of, that I'll keep coming back to tonight, is that grief is unique. It's not the same for everybody. And your grief will not look like somebody else's. There are commonalities, from all the research and stuff, but we're still all individuals, and we will grieve individually. So
now, is there a specific order? Like I hear this, there's like 5 stages of grief or something like that. Is there something like, is that a myth or is that real? I think it's denial and anger, bargaining is one of them, acceptance is another one.
That's my second myth, Eric.
It's almost like we're working from it.
It's almost like, exactly. Yes, we have all probably heard of the stages of grief. And that comes from the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was one of the pioneers in grief research. And her stages of grief model has led people to believe that grief is kind of like a to-do list. Again, we love that. Stages, sure, check them off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, done. But it doesn't really work like that. It's more of a zig and a zag, and you can go backwards and forwards and feel like you got this, and you might have a good day, and then you wake up and it's your loved one's birthday or an anniversary, and it sends you right back to square one. So there's another model called the dual process model, and I won't bore everybody with the details of that, but it's a lot more accurate in how people experience grief and how they cope with grief, because it focuses on the loss of the circumstances. So the loss is the memories that you have, yearning for the person to be back with you, thinking about the dreams that you had with the person for the future, and ruminating maybe on the death itself, and reliving it over and over and things like that. And then there's the restoration aspect of it, which is the layers of the practical part, the financial changes that you face when you especially like if you're losing a spouse or something like that. The challenge of restoring your life. So it's that second part of grief, that integrating that loss into your life. So going from the present to your memory. So that's that restoration. You're trying to restore this idea of your life now without that person with you. So that tends to be a more accurate model of loss and grief. But certainly the denial and the anger, the depression and bargaining and acceptance, those are all very common when people are grieving. But it's just important to remember that they don't happen in order. You know, it's not a linear path. You can be all over the place. It's messy, and just about anything you're feeling is normal. You know,
Yeah.
So
you're
what I'm
not
hearing,
crazy. You're grieving. Is what I say constantly to my clients.
so what I hear you saying is that there's no right way or wrong way to grieve.
Right.
Is that what
Right.
you're saying?
Yes. Everybody's different. You know, it's not, it doesn't happen in order, and there's no right way and there's no wrong way. And we have to remember that when we see someone else grieving, you know, here in the South, it's common for people to say, oh, look at her. Did you see her? She was so strong. She looked so good. Her hair looked awesome. She's doing so well. Bless her heart. You know, we make a lot of assumptions based on that, you know, what we imagine somebody's grief must feel like.
I just gotta say your North Carolina accent's coming out.
Oh yeah, I turned it up a little bit there. But
Is there any, can you think of unhealthy ways to grieve at all? I mean, other than physically harming yourself, or others in that same vein, is there any unhealthy ways to grieve?
well, for sure, overusing alcohol or drugs, like you said, harming yourself, any self-medicating with drugs or alcohol. That's the big ones that I, you know, that I can come up with. Not seeking support, you know, it is unhealthy in a sense. You know, it's okay to feel like you need some time away from people, but it's not okay to isolate yourself to the point where all you're doing is ruminating on your loved one. You know, so grief is tricky because grief is supposed to be painful, but there are certainly like unhealthy, you know, ways to get through it.
Yeah, so bottling it up, I would imagine, would somewhat be unhealthy. I mean, obviously, being isolated, keeping yourself, you know, like, hey, I just need some time alone, but keeping it down long term, which I see a lot of religions encouraging folks to do, can be pretty harmful. Is that right?
Yeah, like, you know, putting a Band-Aid on it and saying like, well, at least they're not suffering anymore, or at least they're in a better place, those kinds of things. Like, those are not helpful. And, you know, the anger part is natural, and a lot of religious traditions kind of discourage that, you know, don't be angry at God, don't question God, that kind of thing. And anger is just, it's a natural emotion. It has a purpose, and it's part of grieving. You can certainly be angry that the person isn't here anymore. You can be angry at the illness that took them, or whatever, and whatever you're grieving. It's certainly expected and natural to feel anger. So what's important is that we express those feelings in some way. Writing about it, listening to music, talking to somebody, distracting yourself is actually, you know, a healthy part of grieving.
Oh,
You
really?
you cannot grieve 24 hours a day. Like, that cannot be the only thing you do. It will be the only thing you do sometimes, but not forever. So it's a balance there, and you have to allow yourself to feel the pain, and then allow yourself to feel okay sometimes too, because then that's where the guilt kind of kicks in. And if you actually have a good day or you're feeling happy, you can start to beat yourself up because my grief is supposed to look this way. It's supposed to look like me crying all the time.
So
You know,
you're almost.
go ahead, Eric.
Oh, sorry, Todd.
Sorry.
It almost seems like you're suggesting that our minds get in the way of our grieving. Like, if we would let our body kind of experience it and express it and be okay with that, it sounds like that's healthy.
Yeah, I think that we kind of get in our own way, because we have, societal, cultural norms or religious tradition or whatever it is, that we keep going back to, that can lead us to do this the right way. And if we can just remember that there is no right or wrong, and you feel what you feel, and you have permission to feel those feelings, then you can take as long as you take.
Kind of piggybacking on that, I mentioned the dog that we had to put down several years ago, and when I do start to talk about her and kind of how tough that was, I still get choked up. I still well up with tears, and it's hard for me. Is this something like, is grief something that I get over? Like, as I was told, I feel that, hey, get over it. It's been years. You should be done grieving by now.
Move on.
Right. Mm-hmm. Is it something I can get over ever, or?
No, you get through it.
You know what?
You won't actively be grieving forever, yeah. But you will always love your dog, and you won't ever forget her or him. You have pictures, right? You have memories. They are not going anywhere. So I think that's healthy grief that you have processed. I would say that you are not actively grieving. I would say you're having memories of your dog that you love.
Okay.
I love that. I like that perspective. I'm not getting over it. You're hanging on to it because of the memories. Right.
Yeah.
Your attachment now is to the memory.
Yeah. There's a quote that I think it's attributed to Banksy, the artist, but it's always something that has recently resonated with me. That he said, they say that you die twice. Once when you draw your last breath, and the second time, the last time someone says your name, type of thing. So you kind of you die physically, and then you die in the memories of the people that you affected. And so that's kind of nice to hear you say that I'm experiencing and reliving the memories that I had with her, that she's still sort of alive in my own memories.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Yeah. That's how, I think that is what a non-religious, a non-believer's kind of healing process, involves. Instead of ideas about an afterlife, we think about our memories being that person's afterlife, in a sense, that they do live on, in our hearts, in our memories, in the way that we remember them and continue to tell their story.
So what about, here's a twist on it. When my wife and we came out of our religious beliefs about 8 years ago, and especially my wife, she lost 100% of her friends. And that was one of the hardest things for her, the grieving of losing her friends she thought were her real friends. What about that type of grief?
Oh yeah, that's certainly real grief right there. And it's layers and layers of loss when you lose friendships and future plans that you had involving those people. So you not only lose the religious tradition and that framework that kind of guided you, but the social support that was there in that network. You suddenly have to recreate that and find new friendships and gosh, that's really hard as an adult to find friends. It's hard to establish those relationships.
Yeah, it was devastating to to both of us, but especially to my wife. It spun her in a spiral of depression, and it took nearly 2 years to get out of it. And
Wow.
so it was deep.
Yeah. What helped with that? What helped her?
Therapy, going to therapy, yeah,
Yeah.
talking about it,
hmm
and
Probably knowing that she wasn't really alone. She felt very alone,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But she
yeah,
wasn't.
yeah,
Yeah.
very much
Yeah.
so.
There are a lot of losses that present like a complicated kind of grief. And I think definitely like leaving a religion is one of those. Also losing someone to suicide, or in a tragedy, a shock, like an accident, a horrible accident that's shocking and traumatic. A person who goes missing and you don't know, you don't have the answers to what happened. So
Closure to that.
yeah. So those are harder, different to resolve because you lack the answers, and just that process of accepting that you will never know the answers is hard for our human brain, for sure.
Now, we are material beings. We're a complex collection of chemical reactions and physical processes. And with that in mind, I'm kind of thinking that there might be some like physical manifestations of what's going on in our heads with some experiencing some grief. Not talking about like the mourning, but actually. Would there be anything like that? Like, can I experience something like I don't know, like pain, physical pain, as opposed to just mental pain?
Yes. It can look like just about anything. You think about stress and how it can cause headaches and back pain and things like that. Grief does the same thing. And whenever I have, someone who comes to see me who is coping with grief, I always ask, like, have they seen their primary care physician? Because
Wow.
because
Never
grief is
considered.
hard. Grief is hard on your body, and you may not realize it because you're just trying to survive this loss and deal with it. But it can look like headaches or digestion problems. Certainly difficulty sleeping. That's one of the number one things. Or on the other hand, sleeping too much. Same with eating, just losing your appetite completely, or eating too much. Those are kind of the physical, like I mentioned, back pain, nausea. Really hard physically.
So I can actually understand then when someone would turn to alcohol or turn to pills or turn to drugs as an attempt to self-medicate those physical things away. But I had never considered going to a primary doctor, but that's pretty cool. I wanted to cuss as like that. That's like how cool it was to me, but that was neat. I just had a cool understanding now. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. But you mentioned the self-medicating, and the self-medicating, that's that vicious cycle of relying on drugs or alcohol to numb not only the emotional pain but to help you with the physical pain, and so it's kind of it gets into that cycle. You're not even sure like what came first.
And then what kind of mental type of experiences might folks get out of this?
So certainly, we've, talked about the emotional fallout of grief, and it can look like, crying, sadness, feeling, having dark thoughts, feeling like you're unable to concentrate. The more cognitive symptoms would be forgetfulness, confusion, feeling that warped sense of time that we all feel right now.
Wow. Okay, so like time is either totally sped up or slowed down type of thing?
Yeah, just kind of confusion about like, what day is it? How long has it been? And then, you know, replaying that death, you know, the grief timeline kind of in your head to ground yourself. But yeah,
the forgetfulness part is kind of interesting to me as well. Like, I see some folks kind of like, I think my own mom seems to have forgotten some stuff, and when I remind her, she's surprised about it. And she just recently lost her own mother. I wonder if I had never thought that considered forgetfulness might be a cognitive manifestation of grief too.
Yeah, and your brain can play tricks on you when you're grieving. And I'm sure a lot of people here will recognize this kind of thing. But when you've lost somebody and you think something big happens, you know, in your life, whether it's like something happy or something funny, and you think, oh my gosh, I can't wait to tell, you know, and that person's not there. That was your person that you shared things with, and now they're not around. And so for just a split second, you know, your brain expects for you to be able to text that person. And so just for that tiny millisecond, you forget that you've lost them.
It almost sounds like reconditioning yourself from habit. Like, I would call, or I would text my sister or my mother every night, and now I have to kind of get out of that habit, even though I don't want to. I miss her type of thing. Right,
yeah, because you're attached to that person, and you're attached to all those behaviors that you linked with your relationship to that person.
Yeah.
It's common for people to think that that they see the person, you know, and not just people who believe in ghosts, but like people, you know, typically rational people will, you know, again, for a split second, see the back of somebody, you know, in a store or something, and like that looks just like, you know, mom or whatever.
Like the clothing a person would wear, or the gait that they would have, or the hairstyle.
Yeah. So all that's really common, and just kind of just our brains, I think, trying to sort through and make sense of things.
It's a whole time of adjusting. My dad was passed away in 81, and about 3:30 in the afternoons, he'd always come home, and you would literally hear his truck drive in the driveway, because you just expecting that, and you're looking forward to it, and then you realize, oh, yeah,
right. Right, and sometimes you probably thought you almost heard that sound, or something similar would totally take you back to that. Yeah, very common.
Now, kind of coming out of religion, the funerals I experienced had a lot of ritual around it, and I look back at those now, and I see them as a little goofy with some of the things that they did, and the phrases that they said. And so when I came out of religion, my initial reaction was to like just turn away from the whole idea of ritual. Look, I know that all I have is me, where there is no spirit world, or et cetera, so why would I need a ritual type of thing? Because I feel like that was my only example, but I come a little bit around that rituals are important for humans. What do you have to say about that?
Absolutely. You just officiated at a secular wedding.
That's true.
Right?
It's true.
Yeah. So it's really like, you know, don't let the religious people have all the fun. I mean, we know they're not, but but it's not just religious people that need rituals. We do. Rituals are important. They're important to publicly have that acknowledgement of our loss. It gives us a sense of control. And when you're a non-believer, you get to have whatever kind of ritual you want. So that's the beautiful thing about not having these kinds of things, you know, prescribed by a belief system. It's up to you, and it can be a gathering of people, or dedicating, you know, something, a bench or something in a favorite park of your loved one, or planting a tree, or planting a community garden in that person's name, or, I mean, really, like, the sky's the limit. their, that person's favorite music, can be so special and painful, right? It's painful to have those kinds of memories. But that, we know that grief is painful and it's supposed to be. So honor that person and use those rituals to help you get through the pain and not feel so alone.
This last fall, we had, Recovering from Religion had the fall excursion. And one of our workshops that Gail Jordan put on for us was building new traditions in our lives, coming up with new rituals on things that, and like you said, don't let the Christians or the religious people have all the fun. Create our own fun, create our own our traditions in our lives. So. Yeah,
I love that. I missed the excursion. It was right here in North Carolina too.
It was.
I had something else going on that weekend. Yeah. But just that in itself, an excursion of non-believers, that's beautiful. Who says like retreats have to just be like for the corporate world or the, religious. Yeah. Yeah. Anytime people can gather and just feel that those common bonds and that you're going through something together and not so alone, it really can make all the difference, especially for getting through something painful like grief. That's why support groups are so helpful.
Yeah. In grade school, a friend of mine lost his mother very suddenly and very unexpectedly. And my mom did an awesome thing. Like I thought at the time was an awesome thing. We found a tree and did exactly kind of what you said. We found a tree and we planted a tree and put a little plaque out in front of it in memory of so-and-so. And I went to, it was actually in the a nice place at the middle school that we went to. And so I attended that school. I would go out and play recess. And over the years, I got to see this tree grow and get bigger and become become a really like full and mature tree. And every time I saw that tree, I couldn't help but thinking of not only my friend, but his mother as well. And it surprisingly, it put a smile on my face. I wasn't sad about it, but it was a good memory to walk away with. Just remember her and remember my friend too. I really liked that. And you're saying that was a ritual. I didn't even consider that being a ritual.
Yeah, and that's really a great kind because it's something good for the environment and it's a gift to the community and it can carry on her story. Think about like the people who see that plaque or that sign and they say, oh, who was that person? And somebody else knows the story and tells her story to that person. And so she lives on that way. Yeah. And it really is. It's beautiful.
I haven't done it yet as a humanist celebrant, but I would like to one day sort of help do a funeral service for folks. And when I go to funeral services for the religious in churches and stuff, it drives me nuts when they, instead of kind of like focusing on who this person was and kind of sharing memories, there is a constant barrage of you need to get straight with God before you die, or you're never going to see him, or you're going to go into hell. It's like I see it as a disgusting sales call in this church while friends and family are grieving, and I have to bite my tongue, and then I get all bloody, and it's just a bad scene.
Yeah. I've unfortunately attended those kinds of funerals too, where it turns into just, it's like they completely hijack the reason why everyone's there, and they turn it, like you said, into a sales pitch or a chance to scare everyone into, joining the faith. So yeah. And
it keeps people from properly grieving.
Yes.
I hate it so much. I won't go to a religious funeral anymore. If I can help it, I just will avoid them. It's too much.
Yeah, Todd, that's a really good point. When you're grieving and when you are grieving the loss of someone who was religious, and you know, the service happens in a church and you find that very triggering, you know, that it's okay to not go. You know, you get to decide how you grieve.
Yeah, I'll say my goodbyes without, a funeral.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And atheists, certainly, like, you know, if you think about it, when a non-believer expresses their sympathy to you, or their love for you, or condolences, or whatever you want to call it, you can know that it is coming from their heart, because they don't ascribe to any kind of like deal with the supreme being. They're saying these things because they genuinely feel them. So I think, you know, atheists and non-believers just have a more authentic opportunity to express, you know, their sympathy to someone who's grieving, and to support that person
Well, that's
for the real reason, you know.
Mm-hmm. I want to tell you a story. Let me tell you something. Last October, I witnessed a tragic accident from a good friend of mine on a cycling trip. And we were coming down a mountain, and he was going too fast around a curve, and he went over the edge and he was killed. I was the first one there, and I was trying to save my friend, and he didn't make it. But the point of my story is that the next morning, I'm a firefighter, retired firefighter, so we think we're tough and we can handle stuff, trauma like that. We deal with it all the time. But it's different when it's a friend, and a personal friend. And I was okay. I got home that night. I was so tired, exhausted, and I just fell asleep. But I woke up about 3 a.m. in the quiet of the night, and my mind was going crazy and remembering everything that happened the day before and what could have I done different and stuff. And I ended up getting up about 4 in the morning because I couldn't sleep, and went and sat out on my porch with my dog, Momo, and a cup of coffee, and just was trying to chill and think and relax. And about 7 o'clock, my friend, who's a secular friend, Frank, calls me and he says, "Todd, what are you doing?" I said, "Frank, I'm just sitting on my porch just thinking." He said, "Well, I'm in my truck. I'm headed to your house. I just want you to know I'm on my way." He comes over a little after 7, and he sits with me all day on my porch till about 2. And didn't really have to say anything, but we're just sitting in the quietness with me. But the cool thing was, around 8 o'clock, another friend of mine who is an atheist shows up on my porch and comes and sits with me. And then a third one calls and says, "Todd, I'm on my way." I had 3 of my secular friends come and sit with me, and just to be with me, and to grieve with me. And then that afternoon, a group, about 10 guys that were riding with us that were at the accident, they called me and said, "Todd, we're going to go ride our bikes this afternoon. We want to know if you can come and talk to us." And so I showed up, and I went and talked with them, and talking about grief and how to handle trauma that we've experienced and stuff. And we spoke. I was just trying to help them. And they left and went on a bike ride, and 2 guys stayed back because they wanted to talk to me more. And they were both preachers. And they said, "Todd, we are so glad that you were here because we had no idea what to say to tell these people. Are you trained in counseling or something? Because you had such good words." And I just said, "I just love people, and I just want to help." But it just went to me, showed that, like you were saying, that the atheists really know how to lean in, and what they say to you in time of grieving comes from their heart. And the people that are religious are left without words sometimes. So I just want to share that.
What a beautiful story. Yeah. Yeah. That's it, you know, be present, human, being human, not avoiding it. You know, your friends knew that you needed something, right? They didn't know what you needed, but they didn't let that scare them.
No, it meant the world to me that they would just come and be there with me, and not having to say anything or try to say, God needed a cyclist on his team in heaven or something,
Yeah.
So the platitudes.
Yeah. And that was actually my last myth I wanted to bust, was that atheists aren't equipped to handle grief or support others. But no, not having religion, doesn't mean that you don't know what to do with when it comes to rituals or grieving or any of that. You actually have a much healthier, I think, perspective on death too. Just the idea of death. We non-believers tend to appreciate and embrace science, and it's life.
And we kind of understand that this is all we've got. There is no reset button. There is no afterlife. This is all we got. When I feel that when the secular folks that do kind of come and comfort me when I'm grieving for like the loss of my grandmother or loss of my pet, that they understand how precious life is, and they understand that there is nothing else after this, compared to your dog has just traveled over the Rainbow Bridge and you'll see them when you die. Oh, your grandmother is in heaven. You don't know that. You don't know and even those the awful people like this an abusive parent is going to heaven or something. Yeah, you'll see them again. I so appreciate the secular folks who come to me and comfort me when in times of loss and mourning. It just feels so heartfelt, like what you guys were talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's what that's, and we can move on to how to support if we want. Like, we can go ahead and get into that. Some things that are helpful when you're supporting someone who is grieving.
That is kind of something that when I first came out of religion, like, well, I can't say you'll see them again, because I don't believe that. I can't say God will be there to comfort you, because that's feels totally like bullshit now.
Or I'm praying for you.
Or I'm praying for you. Exactly.
What do I say?
What are some of the things that I could do just to, or non-believers can do to folks who are grieving, can say and do for them?
Well, I'll tell you, this is scary and it's not comfortable, but that's why I'm here, to push you out of that comfort zone, and encourage you to do what's helpful, not what's easy. So ask the person to tell you the story of their loved one.
I like
because
that.
So many people are afraid to mention the name of the deceased. It's like, it's all of a sudden this person's life, name, everything about them is taboo, and we are tiptoeing around it. And in grief counseling, with we call it the elephant in the room, that everybody knows is there, but nobody knows what to say. And just saying, like, tell me the story of your person. What do you miss about them? If you have memories of the person, so if that person was also close to you, share your favorite memory of them. Share something funny or touching that the person did for you, because this is what that bereaved person is craving. Anything about the person, like, they have their memories, but they may not even know what you remember about their spouse or mother or father or whoever it is that they've lost. So talk about it.
Yeah, I hear that every now and then. Like, someone would say a story, and the other person who was really close to that, the deceased, would say, I never knew that about him, and kind of like it would be a glimmer of a smile or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really important, and it can feel really weird, like you're doing something wrong, right? But like we said before, there's no right or wrong way to do this. Mm-hmm. And it is, it's like it's genuinely, like, it's the most helpful thing to do. So also, if you don't know what to say, you know, sometimes you're in that situation where you don't really know the person, or you didn't know the deceased, or you're not like super close with them, and you may not feel comfortable saying like, so tell me about your loved one. You could say, I have no idea what to say. If you don't know what to say, don't make something up. You don't have to. You could say, this must be really horrible for you. I have no words.
Yeah.
Because your presence is what really matters. And I know Dave Warnock said something similar last week in his talk, that just being present, you know, because especially once the services, you know, have happened and everybody stopped bringing food by and that kind of thing, and they're getting back into daily life without their person around. That is one of the most isolating and lonely times. So, you know, if you can just not ignore them and check in on them, and if they don't feel like having people around, they can certainly say that. But, you know, but you can always say, I'm thinking about you and wondering how you're doing, and I have no idea what you must be feeling right now. It must be so hard.
Mm. What about
I love those words.
Yeah. What about saying things like, at least they're no longer in pain? That kind of feels weird to me.
Yeah, it feels weird because please don't say that. Okay, I know I said there was no right or wrong way to do this, but don't say stuff like that.
Or
I think there's no right or wrong way to grieve, but there's certainly like better ways and less effective ways to support somebody. Yeah. Let's put it that way. Yeah, right. Saying like, oh, at least they're no longer in pain. You know,
it's kind of dismissive.
Yes. Yeah. You're saying like, oh, don't feel that way. You're taking their feelings away. And that's not for anybody to do. Let them have their feelings. It's not the time.
Like, at least they're in a better place.
Right. And for a non-believer, like, we know that's not true.
Yeah. They're worm food at this point.
Right.
Don't say that either.
And don't say that, Eric.
Okay. All right.
Come on, Eric.
Eric, remember, I don't know what to say. Let's practice.
I don't know what to say. Great. I got it. All right.
There you go.
Do a lot of times when there's a spouse that has passed away, or a significant other, and you've combined a house over years and years, and there are memories that are in the house, clothing or jewelry, or even toiletries, or food in the refrigerator. What would it be for someone to take a lot of time to kind of sort through those, or even not even deal with it? Is that kind of a okay thing to do?
Absolutely. That stuff can wait. It's up to the grieving person to decide when the right time is. So that's another thing that people tend to do to be helpful. You know, they will encourage that person, especially like a widow or a widower, like, oh, aren't you ready to get back out there and date? Or, you know, haven't you gotten rid of his stuff yet? Or, you know, don't you want to take these pictures down? Like, you know, and that's not helpful. I think people worry, you know, sometimes it comes from a good place, that they're worried that you're going to be stuck in your grief. But, you know, that it has no timeline. So if you really think about it, there's no rush to do any of that stuff. So, so when you're grieving, it's not really the time to be, and especially like making decisions like selling a house, or, you know, selling the person's car, or it can feel like the best thing to do is just get rid of everything, out of sight, out of mind. But really it's much more helpful to take your time with stuff like that and not be impulsive.
Got it.
Back when my dad passed away, my mom took over a year before she cleaned out his closet. And I think she felt guilty about it because I think if I remember right, she was pressured, like, why haven't you cleaned out the closet yet? And I remember coming into her bedroom and she was sitting on the bed crying, and she was going through my dad's things. And, but she took her time doing that. I mean, so.
Yeah, because that can't, that's just something that can't be rushed. If, if a person decides to do it the next day, like it's their decision. I think that's what's important to just keep coming back to, is that each person's grief is theirs.
Yeah. Well, we're running a little short on time before we get to the Q&A part. What about some like tips for coping with grief? Do you got a list of those perhaps?
I do. Take your time. It's awful. It's so awful to grieve. It's supposed to be awful to feel it, feel your pain, like feel the feelings, whatever you're feeling, good, bad, neutral. If you're having a good day, have a good day. If you're having a good 5 minutes, have a good 5 minutes, because the next 10 minutes might be terrible. But just take your time. Get your basic needs met. So eat something. Your appetite certainly won't be the same, but eat something and stay hydrated and sleep. Try to sleep. Your sleep will be off. It won't be the same. It'll be different. You might be sleeping too much, or you might not be able to sleep at all. But getting back to some kind of routine is helpful. So, go to bed when, at your like usual bedtime, like try, getting back to work and things like that were typically part of your routine. If you had an exercise regimen, try to get back to that, as like do your best to get. Your best will look different than it used to be. So be patient with yourself, but try to have your routine, because those are the things that keep you grounded. You are still here. So anything that keeps you moving and keeps you getting up in the morning and going about your day, those things are going to be helpful. It's going to be hard, but you can do it. Rely on your support system. Like we said earlier, you may not feel like having a ton of people around, and that's okay. But if you do need to talk, have that list of trusted people. You may have a huge social network, but not all those people will be there in the way that you need them to be. But you might have a list of 3 or 4 people that can be your go-tos during this time, that you can call and say, I really need to talk, or I need to totally not talk about my grief. I need to talk about you. I need to hear something that's not related to what I'm going through. Because that's a distraction, and that's okay. Moving around, support groups can be helpful. They're not for everybody, but your community hospice organization can usually has offerings like that can help. Sometimes they even have specific ones related to a certain type of grief, like if you've lost a spouse, or like a men's group, things like that. It can be really helpful because you just don't feel so alone. And your friends are your friends, but they may not be going through something like you're going through. And so a support group of people who are also grieving can just be really helpful with that, not feeling so alone, with other people who get it. Grief is not a mental illness. So people are resilient. So remember that to get through grief, you don't necessarily need a counselor. But it can be helpful to talk to a professional, somebody who's trained, because they do get it. And they won't say any of those stupid things that some people say. So, but it's certainly not a requirement. People grieve all the time without counseling and without God.
Perfect. Well, Kayce, thank you for so much for
Thank you.
talking with us. We have got so many great questions from the chat. So let's start off with we have there's quite a few folks who have come out of religion, and their friends and family have shunned them, have ostracized them, have turned their backs on them. What kind of is there anything different about the grieving process for being ostracized from friends and family?
Yeah, I would say that it's, well, I mean, each type of grief is different. But I think when you go through something like that, there's just a lot of what we call shadow grief, you know, so it's not just the religious traditions that you've lost, but you're being, you know, and not just the relationships that have changed, like they have actually disappeared, and they're actually, you know, that shunning part with the shame is just an added layer, because then it makes you question yourself, and maybe even like doubt whether you've made the right decision or not, and you really feel more isolated than ever, and like you don't have anybody when everybody you counted on basically has just suddenly decided to disappear from your life, and not only disappear but ostracize you. So yeah, I would say that's a more, you know, it's just a complicated kind of process.
Mhm.
What advice would you give to help someone who has a child that's grieving, like a loss of a grandparent or a pet, or maybe their parents went through a divorce?
Kids, depending on the age, kids, we have to give kids a lot more credit, because that we usually do, because they pick up on things and they know when something's up. So I'm a fan of talking honestly with kids about death, about grief, you know, and certainly in an age appropriate way. But I think when we can share a story, a really difficult, you know, on a difficult topic with a child, we are giving them a gift. They're going to grow up with a much healthier attitude about emotions and painful feelings, and healing from pain, and talking about grief and talking about death. And it will still be hard for them, but they will be able to have conversations about it, and they'll be able to express it instead of hiding from it. So I say, you know, have those conversations. There are books, you know, about talking with kids about grief, and you know, so look for some of those. But yeah, I just say, like, don't hide from it, and don't make up, you know, stories about it. You know, don't make up stuff. And don't be afraid to say I don't know.
Yeah.
To a child, you know, if something happened, like with the example of a divorce, I think it's really important to say to a child that, you know, things don't always work out. You know, grown-ups can't always get along, and we've decided to divorce, and we're still your parents. We're not married anymore, but we're still here for you.
We still love you.
We still love you. Yeah. Yeah. Don't shy away from it, because they know something's up. And the more honest you can be, the more they're going to be able to feel like they can come to you when they have something difficult on their mind, or they're going through some kind of painful experience.
So my mother went through a pretty bad divorce. My father is an asshole, and treated her as such through the entire divorce. But for years, you know, he is still alive, and for years my mother was grieving the divorce. And I was thinking that, hey, there has to be some sort of time where she kind of gets back into the dating pool, kind of gets over it. But it seemed to take a lot longer. And you know, after this conversation, I'm recognizing how I should have not kind of pushed her to get over it. But what can you suggest about dealing with grief where the situation is, or the person is still alive or still there, and they kind of are either in, you know, you can reach out to them and fling them the middle finger, or you know, what kind of suggestions do you have around that?
Yeah, that having your heart broken is one of the worst kinds of grief. Yeah, because like you said, the person's still around, and especially if you live in the same community and you you could run into them, or you see them move on with somebody new.
Yeah, like getting remarried or finding another significant other or something like that.
Yeah.
It almost seems like it would be easier had the person passed away than if they stuck around.
Yeah, that's a really common way to look at it. It's really common for people to say that and feel that. Yeah, because I mean, it's kind of the truth. You would, if you still have, that person's around and they chose not to have a life with you, that's terrible. And you have to realize that you will get through it. I mean, I know that sounds empty, but you have to take your time, and you have to rely on the people who are in your life who do care about you.
Okay.
So
like
support support is really important. That person, it's to have this idealistic memory of a relationship once it's over, and to kind of glorify it in your mind that it was perfect and you'll never find somebody just like that person and you'll never love again and all that. And that's normal and natural, feel that, but that's not rational. That's your emotions and that's your attachment to that person. So feel those things and then move on. Feel those things, honor what you're feeling, acknowledge it, express it some way, and think about, the evidence that you have that you will get through it. People get through it all the time. You will get through it too. You are not alone. You have people who care about you. You can eventually move on and date. There are plenty of people out there. So, think about the evidence and try to be more rational about it is what I would say. But but don't just forget about your emotions. Those are also really important.
In some sense, it was almost a loss of an identity, like who this person was. I saw my mom define herself as a mother and as a wife. And once she lost that wife side, then she kind of was thrown into a tailspin, not understanding kind of who she was if she wasn't a wife. And I kind of suspect that is sort of similar in the religious aspect. Like, hey, I identified as a Jehovah's Witness. I identified as a Baptist. I identified as a Muslim for 40 years, and I'm losing this identity. I don't know who to be or how to be without those identities. And it sounds like you're kind of suggesting, give it time. It's okay to feel what you're feeling and what you're going through. And you're also suggesting finding a support group to kind of discuss and express these emotions and these feelings. Am I off about that?
No, that's exactly right. And yes, you mentioned the identity. Yeah, you lose a piece of yourself. That was like you said, with your mom, that was a role, a really significant role that she played in her life. That was part of who she was. And so so not only is she grieving the relationship and the person, but a piece of herself that she doesn't have anymore.
Yeah.
So you can't ever replace that exact role, but you can learn to embrace something new, and that's what can give value to something like a tragedy. Eventually, not in the beginning. When you're in the beginning of it, it's painful and that's where you are. But eventually, as you move through it, you can embrace what you learned from that experience. And I think especially when relationships end, if we can get to a point where we can appreciate what happened, and look at it truthfully and take responsibility for our part in it. And what can we apply, to the next relationship.
And that's something that it sounds like could be brought about through a support group or even through some professional counseling too, kind of understanding the responsibility in it and helping to move past it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm biased, but I think everybody could use some counseling. Just if you don't have, and I don't think you need a mental health diagnosis to benefit from counseling. but just to have some support and reassurance that, you know, you're not crazy and you're not alone.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask one more, and I think we need to wrap it up because we've been on almost an hour and a half. This has been really good. But talking about embracing something new in our lives, you know, most of us that have been in religion most of our lives, we're always taught that when we hear about death or someone passing, that we have to rejoice in that. And we weren't allowed to grieve. How do people deal with this switch now that, you know, we're not really rejoicing that we lost a loved one and allowing ourselves to grieve properly?
Well, yeah, I think, that kind of robs you from some of the pain, you know, and when the religious tradition tells you to, you know, celebrate the homegoing of the person. I think you can do both. Like, you could celebrate the life of the person. You can celebrate your relationship and what that person meant to you, their companionship or their friendship. And you can be sad that they're no longer here. You know, I think those two things can be true at the same time. That you can be in pain and you can be happy that you had them in your life, you know? So I think instead of, you know, the religious spin on it is rejoice that they're in heaven. I think the non-believer's way of looking at that, which is much more rational, is that I miss that person and I'm in incredible pain right now. And I'm thankful that I had them in my life. And I have all these good memories, you know.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, you may not, you know, it's also okay to not embrace that, you know, in the beginning. If all you can see is the pain that you're feeling, that's okay too.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, very good.
Kayce, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really, really great talk. I've really enjoyed myself.
Thank you. I was happy to do it.
Now,
Reach out today at recoveringfromreligion.org.